August 4th, 1943. Bobington Camp, Dorset, England. The morning fog clung to the land as Major General A.C. Richardson's pen moved steadily across the classified document marked Most Secret in bold red letters. Each stroke recorded observations that would expose one of Britain's most embarrassing wartime failures. The reliability test begins today, he wrote. 3 nations' machines would travel 2,000 miles across Britain. Only one would prove worthy of modern warfare. The weight of that prediction would become clear in the weeks ahead. Through the morning, mist that shrouded the camp, 11 tanks stood in formation on the parade ground, engines idling with varying degrees of confidence. The mechanical symphony was telling. 3 American M4A2 Shermans powered by General Motors twin diesel engines purred with industrial smoothness. 3 M4A4 Shermans with Chrysler multi-bank petrol engines rumbled with reliable consistency. And then there were the British cruisers, the Cromwells, sleek, fast, and promising on paper. But their engines whispered doubts in the damp morning air. Soldiers and engineers alike glanced nervously at the tanks, aware that history would remember not just the victories, but the failures hidden beneath the polished armor. Each tank, each engine carried the hopes and anxieties of its nation. Where are you watching this video from? Drop your location in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. And if you're a fan of WWW2 tank stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because today we dive into a journey of engineering, courage, and one of the biggest lessons British armored forces ever learned. As the engines roared to life and the fog lifted, a quiet tension filled the camp. The race of 2,000 miles was about to begin, and the world would soon see which tanks could endure and which would falter. The morning fog of Dorset slowly gave way to the pale sunlight of early August. On the parade ground, the tanks sat in stark contrast, gleaming American Shermans on one side, promising reliability, and the British Cromwells on the other, fast and elegant, yet carrying an air of uncertainty. For Major General A.C. Richardson and his staff, this was more than a test. It was a reckoning. The British Army prided itself on precision, engineering, and innovation. Yet the Cromwell, designed as a high-speed cruiser tank, had already shown hints of weakness in long-range exercises. Today, that weakness would be put to the ultimate test. The M4 Sherman was a marvel of wartime pragmatism. The Americans had focused on simplicity, ease of repair, and logistical reliability. Diesel engines, robust transmissions, and interchangeable parts made it capable of covering thousands of miles with minimal maintenance. Soldiers could fix the engine on the field, often under fire, and keep moving. The Sherman's design sacrificed some armor and firepower for reliability, a decision that, as it would soon become clear, would define the success of Allied armored campaigns. The Cromwell, by contrast, was the pride of British engineering. Sleek, fast, and lightly armored, it was intended to outmaneuver enemy tanks with speed rather than raw firepower. Its Rolls-Royce Meteor engine promised high performance, but that promise came with a cost. The complex machinery required careful maintenance, precise handling, and a level of logistical support that could be scarce during prolonged operations. If the tanks were to traverse 2,000 miles without failing, the Cromwell's design philosophy would be tested to its absolute limit. Tank crews inspected their machines, wiping condensation from gun barrels and checking tracks for tension. For them, this was more than a technical exercise. It was a test of courage, skill, and trust in their machines. Young soldiers whispered to one another, exchanging stories of previous exercises, some praising the Sherman's dependability, others defending the Cromwell's agility. The tension was palpable. Every eye flicked from engine to engine, every ear tuned to the hum of pistons and gears. Meanwhile, logistics officers planned routes, supply points, and maintenance stops. Water, fuel, spare parts, all had to be accounted for. The Americans had an advantage here too. Their tanks were supported by an efficient supply network designed to keep them moving. British crews would have to rely on ingenuity, careful planning, and perhaps a little luck to prevent mechanical failure from ending the test prematurely. Major General Richardson moved among the crews, his clipboard heavy with notes. "Remember," he said, addressing both British and American soldiers, "this is not just a race of distance. It is a race of reliability, endurance, and engineering excellence. History will judge the winners." Where are you watching from right now? Comment below. I want to see how far the story of these tanks reaches. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that uncover the hidden truths of World War II. As engines warmed and crews settled into their positions, a quiet murmur of anticipation passed through the camp. The stage was set. The 2,000-mile trial was about to begin, and in the back of every soldier's mind lingered a single question: which tank would survive the journey, and which would be left behind, stranded by its own ambitions? By mid-morning, the fog had lifted, revealing the patchwork of green fields, narrow lanes, and winding country roads that would challenge the tank's endurance. The convoy roared to life. Sherman engines hummed with steady confidence, their crews relaxed but alert. Cromwell crews gripped their controls tightly, aware that speed alone would not guarantee success over such a grueling distance. The first few miles passed without incident. American crews exchanged nods of approval as their Shermans glided smoothly over uneven terrain. Diesel engines vibrated with mechanical consistency, suspensions absorbed bumps, and transmissions shifted seamlessly. It was the kind of reliability that could only be born from simplicity and experience. Across the formation, the M4A4 Sherman's Chrysler engines rumbled predictably, proving that industrial design could withstand long hours under pressure. But the Cromwells were beginning to show their vulnerabilities. A faint rattle from one engine hinted at overworked components. A track misaligned slightly on another threatened to slow progress. Engineers rode alongside, eyes sharp, ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble. The high-speed cruiser philosophy demanded precision driving, careful throttle control, and constant maintenance checks, a far cry from the straightforward operation of the Sherman. By the afternoon, minor setbacks began to accumulate. One Cromwell developed overheating issues, forcing its crew to stop on the side of a country road, while engineers attempted makeshift repairs. Another's transmission grumbled ominously under stress, sending a warning tremor through the vehicle. Each delay added tension, not just to the crews, but to the watching officers and logistics planners. They knew every stoppage could decide the outcome of this unprecedented test. Meanwhile, the Shermans maintained their rhythm. Fuel consumption, spare part replacements, and routine checks went smoothly. For crews riding in these tanks, it felt almost effortless, yet they remained vigilant. In the back of every soldier's mind lingered the knowledge that mechanical failure could strike anywhere, at any time, and even the strongest design had its limits. Personal stories began to surface. A young British corporal whispered about a previous exercise where his Cromwell had failed halfway through a similar course. He recalled the frustration, the tense silence of a stalled tank in the open, and the hours spent trying to coax the engine back to life. Across the convoy, American crews exchanged stories of Shermans carrying them safely through treacherous terrain, bridging the gap between theory and battlefield reality. At key checkpoints, observers took notes, recording engine performance, track integrity, and overall endurance. The contrast was stark. While the Shermans pressed on with minimal intervention, the Cromwells demanded constant attention, repairs, and human ingenuity to keep moving. The first seeds of doubt about the British design had already begun to sprout, foreshadowing the challenges to come. Where are you watching this from? Drop your comment below. I want to see which country is following this story. And don't forget to subscribe for more WW2 tank stories, where we uncover the engineering triumphs and failures that shaped history. As the convoy pressed deeper into the English countryside, it became clear. The test was no longer just a measure of speed or firepower. It had become a battle of endurance, a confrontation between reliability and ambition, and a journey that would soon expose the limits of even the most advanced British machinery. By the second week of the trial, the convoy had crossed over 1,000 miles of British countryside, from Dorset through the rolling hills of Hampshire, Wiltshire, and into the industrial heartlands. The American Shermans, engines humming with unwavering reliability, had barely faltered, maintaining a consistent pace that impressed even the most skeptical observers. Every mile reinforced what engineers and crews already suspected. These machines were built not just for war, but for endurance. The Cromwells, however, were beginning to falter under the strain. The sleek, high-speed cruiser tanks had excelled in short exercises and sprint maneuvers, but this continuous, grueling journey exposed their limitations. Engine overheating had become a constant concern, and the complex gearbox required near-constant adjustment. On narrow lanes or muddy fields, a misaligned track or stalled engine could bring the entire formation to a halt. On one particularly grueling day, a Cromwell began emitting a low, menacing clatter from its Meteor engine. The crew tried everything, adjusting throttle, coasting down slopes, checking the cooling system, but the warning signs only intensified. The tank ground to a halt beside a hedgerow, smoke curling from the engine bay. Engineers scrambled, replacing parts with tools scavenged from supply trucks. But even their expertise could not guarantee continued movement. Meanwhile, the Shermans continued as if nothing were amiss. The M4A2s cruised smoothly, their diesel engines resistant to overheating, while the Chrysler-powered M4A4s rumbled reliably, their multi-bank configuration absorbing the strain. Commanders noted that while British tanks required frequent stops, the American simplicity allowed them to traverse hundreds of miles without significant intervention. The stark contrast could not have been clearer. The pressure weighed heavily on the crews. Soldiers in the Cromwells exchanged nervous glances, aware that every delay chipped away at confidence. Officers documented every breakdown, every improvisation, knowing that these records would shape the British Army's armored doctrine for years to come. The mechanical failures were not just numbers on a report, they were a revelation of the limits of design philosophy. By late afternoon, the convoy reached the outskirts of Birmingham. The Shermans rolled past, engines steady, while several Cromwells lagged behind, supported by repair crews and auxiliary vehicles. Each mile of the 2,000-mile trial had become a test of patience, ingenuity, and endurance, highlighting a critical truth. Speed and agility could not compensate for reliability in sustained operations. The engineers muttered under their breaths, realizing that the lessons of this test extended far beyond Dorset or Birmingham. The Cromwell had been envisioned as a high-speed solution to battlefield mobility, but its failures on this extended trial revealed that modern warfare demanded a different kind of excellence: consistent, resilient, and simple. By the evening, the implications were clear. The Shermans had demonstrated that longevity and mechanical reliability could carry a tank through thousands of miles of harsh terrain without catastrophic failure. The Cromwell, elegant and fast though it was, had shown cracks in its armor, both literal and metaphorical. In this crucible of endurance, the American design had triumphed where British ambition had fallen short. The night air was cool and heavy as the convoy set up camp on the outskirts of Coventry. Mechanics huddled over the Cromwells, replacing worn-out components, tightening bolts, and coaxing reluctant engines back to life. Sparks flew from welding torches, and the scent of hot metal mingled with diesel fumes. In contrast, the Shermans sat almost untouched, their crews cleaning and inspecting with a quiet confidence born from knowing their tanks were nearly infallible. It was here, under the dim glow of lanterns, that the true scale of the Cromwell's limitations became painfully evident. The engine of one cruiser tank, already patched twice that day, had developed a severe oil leak. A simple component failure threatened to immobilize the entire vehicle, forcing the crew into an anxious wait for replacement parts from a supply truck still miles behind. Other Cromwells had minor but compounding issues: overheating, track misalignment, and worn suspension systems. Every stoppage demanded human intervention, ingenuity, and nerves of steel. Officers and engineers gathered around, taking meticulous notes, aware that this test was more than a technical evaluation. It was a study in endurance under stress. The observations would influence British armored strategy for years, shaping decisions about tank production, deployment, and maintenance. Meanwhile, the Sherman crews relaxed in the background, some playing cards, others chatting quietly, the occasional burst of laughter breaking the otherwise tense silence. Their tanks required only routine checks, fuel top-ups, lubrication, and minor track adjustments. It was a stark illustration of engineering philosophy in action: simplicity and reliability versus complexity and ambition. The next morning, the convoy resumed its journey through the Midlands. As the Cromwells limped along, each breakdown delayed the schedule and tested the patience of crews. Engineers worked tirelessly, improvising repairs with limited resources. One tank stalled in the middle of a muddy field, its tracks caked with grime. The crew pushed, pulled, and finally managed to get it moving again, but precious hours were lost. In contrast, the Shermans moved like clockwork, engines steady, suspensions forgiving, and crews barely noticing the rough terrain. Their consistency was demoralizing to British soldiers, who had hoped their advanced designs would outperform the Americans. Each mile became a test of endurance, not just of machinery, but of morale. As they approached the industrial towns of the north, it became clear that the Cromwell's high-speed design, so celebrated in theory, could not match the Sherman's unwavering reliability over long distances. Engineers documented every failure, every improvisation, every delay, evidence that British armored doctrine would need serious reevaluation. By evening, a quiet unease settled over the camp. The Cromwells were not broken beyond repair, but their performance had exposed an uncomfortable truth. In prolonged operations, speed and agility alone could not guarantee success. The Shermans, by contrast, had proven that endurance and mechanical simplicity were as decisive as firepower on the battlefield. History would remember this test not as a minor exercise, but as a lesson in the fundamentals of armored warfare. Reliability, maintainability, and resilience could outweigh innovation when it came to long campaigns. And in the weeks ahead, as the convoy neared the final stretch of its 2,000-mile trial, the consequences of these early failures would become painfully clear. By the time the convoy reached Yorkshire, the contrast between the Shermans and the Cromwells was undeniable. American tanks had traveled nearly half the 2,000-mile course with barely a hiccup. Their engines remained cool, their tracks aligned, and their crews confident. The Cromwells, elegant and ambitious as they were, had accumulated hours of downtime that no ingenuity could fully erase. Every repair, every pause, chipped away at the promise that British engineers had hoped the cruiser tanks would deliver. The test had become more than a measure of machinery. It was a study in doctrine and philosophy. The Shermans exemplified the American approach to armored warfare: reliable, simple, and designed to withstand the unpredictability of prolonged operations. Parts could be swapped quickly, engines repaired on the field, and the tanks pressed forward day after day. In contrast, the Cromwell's advanced engineering revealed a hidden truth. Complexity was a liability over extended distances, and speed without endurance could fail when it mattered most. Soldiers who had ridden in the Cromwells spoke openly now of the stress and uncertainty that accompanied every mile. Engines that once hummed with promise now rattled, belts frayed, and transmissions groaned under pressure. Crews improvised constantly, their morale tested as much by mechanical challenges as by the long journey itself. Engineers noted that even minor failures in these high-performance tanks demanded significant time and labor to correct. A stark contrast to the Sherman's forgiving design. By the final week of the trial, it was clear that the lesson was not just about mechanical performance, but about what modern warfare required. Speed and firepower alone could not win battles if machines could not reliably reach the battlefield intact. Logistics, maintainability, and endurance had proven decisive. British commanders, while proud of the Cromwell's design innovations, now recognized that ambition without reliability could compromise operational success. Reports from Major General Richardson's team began circulating among British armored command. The data, meticulous and uncompromising, would shape tank production decisions for years to come. Lessons from the 2,000-mile trial influenced not only immediate maintenance protocols, but also the design philosophy for future tanks. The emphasis shifted. Reliability and simplicity would become just as important as performance and speed. Meanwhile, the Sherman crews, largely unaffected by the hardships that plagued their British counterparts, completed the course with steady confidence. Their experience validated the American doctrine that had been questioned by some critics in the early stages of the war. Reliability, not just innovation, had emerged as a decisive factor in armored operations. As the convoy reached the final checkpoint, exhausted crews stepped from their tanks. The contrast was stark. While the Shermans had covered the distance with remarkable consistency, the Cromwells bore the marks of their struggle: overheated engines, worn tracks, and exhausted crews who had battled not just terrain, but the limits of their machines. The outcome of the trial was more than a mechanical verdict. It was a lesson for history. The 2,000-mile test had revealed the hidden truths of armored warfare. Ambition without endurance could falter, while simplicity and reliability could ensure survival and success. For the British, it was a sobering revelation. For the Americans, a quiet validation of design philosophy. And as the soldiers packed away tools, charts, and logs, one fact became painfully clear. War was not won by elegance or speed alone, but by machines and men that could endure the test of time. As the convoy approached the Pennines, the terrain shifted dramatically. Rolling hills gave way to steep inclines, narrow passes, and rocky paths that tested every machine to its limit. The Sherman tanks, engineered for endurance, powered up the slopes with steady reliability, their engines handling the uneven terrain with practiced ease. Meanwhile, the Cromwells strained under the relentless challenge. Their engines overheated faster, and gearboxes groaned under stress, producing that familiar, worrying rattle that had haunted crews for weeks. one particularly grueling day brought the trial to a head. A Cromwell attempting to ascend a steep, muddy incline stalled completely. The crew scrambled, pushing and pulling, but the weight of the machine combined with the treacherous mud made progress agonizingly slow. Engineers jumped in, improvising repairs on the spot, but the clock was merciless. Every delay meant lost miles, and every mechanical hiccup became a glaring testament to the limits of high-speed engineering when stretched over long distances. In contrast, the Shermans continued their march almost effortlessly. Diesel engines absorbed stress without complaint, and tracks flexed over obstacles with minimal intervention. Crews moved with quiet efficiency, refueling, lubricating, and checking instruments in rhythm with the hum of the engines. The gap between the American and British tanks widened with each mile, a visual representation of the philosophical divide between their engineering approaches. The psychological impact on the Cromwell crews was significant. Confidence eroded with every breakdown. Soldiers who had once taken pride in the sleek design of their tanks now cursed the very machinery they depended on. Sweat, grime, and exhaustion etched lines across their faces as they wrestled their machines over hills and through mud. Meanwhile, the Sherman's crews remained calm, reassured by the predictability and resilience of their vehicles. At a particularly treacherous ridge, a Cromwell finally succumbed to a critical failure. Its engine seized, and smoke curled ominously from the exhaust. Crews on surrounding tanks watched helplessly as repair teams struggled to revive the machine, knowing that every passing hour made the 2,000-mile goal harder to achieve. The Shermans, miles ahead, continued forward, their reliability underscoring a quiet but undeniable triumph. Observers documented every event meticulously. They knew that the outcome of this extended trial would not just influence British armored strategy, but also validate American design philosophy for future campaigns. The stark contrast between endurance and ambition, between reliability and sophistication, became painfully clear. In this crucible of terrain and distance, it was not the fastest or most advanced machine that prevailed. It was the one built to endure. By the end of the day, the convoy had reached a plateau overlooking a valley below. The Shermans rested lightly, engines cooling predictably, while the Cromwells bore the marks of their struggle, dents, scratches, and worn tracks. The sight was a sobering reminder. In the harsh calculus of war, ambition without reliability could falter, and even the most promising designs could fail when pushed beyond their limits. The convoy's approach to the final stretch of the trial brought a sobering quiet over the camp. The Cromwells, battered and worn, had endured countless repairs, improvisations, and long hours of strain. Crews were exhausted, their nerves frayed, yet determination kept them moving. Each mile reminded them of the delicate balance between ambition and endurance, a lesson that would be etched into British armored doctrine for decades. Engineers huddled over maintenance logs, comparing performance data between British and American machines. Patterns emerged that could not be ignored. While the Shermans cruised smoothly across all terrains, the Cromwells required continuous intervention, with engine overheating, track misalignment, and gearbox stress recurring daily. The lessons were clear. High-speed performance and sophisticated engineering were insufficient if machines could not consistently reach their objective. One Cromwell crew, in particular, had faced near disaster in the Welsh hills. Their engine had overheated mid-ascent, leaving the tank precariously perched on a muddy incline. Crews from nearby tanks scrambled to assist, pushing, towing, and finally coaxing the machine to stable ground. The incident left a deep impression on observers and crews alike. It was a stark reminder that reliability could make or break operations, regardless of tactical skill or courage. Meanwhile, the Shermans advanced with a quiet efficiency. Diesel engines maintained a constant hum, suspension systems absorbed every bump and incline, and minor maintenance checks were completed with minimal disruption. Crew fatigue was far lower, morale remained high, and the predictable performance of their vehicles allowed soldiers to focus on strategy rather than survival. The contrast between the two designs had never been more striking. As the trial neared completion, the British command began to acknowledge what the Americans already knew. Endurance, maintainability, and logistical simplicity were as crucial as armor, speed, or firepower. The Cromwell had excelled in bursts of speed and maneuverability, but over thousands of miles, these qualities were overshadowed by mechanical fragility. Every engine failure, every stalled gearbox, and every track replacement was a tangible reminder of the limits of ambitious engineering without pragmatic design. Yet the test was not a total condemnation. Crews adapted, engineers learned, and procedures were refined. The experience provided a roadmap for future improvements, emphasizing preventive maintenance, simplified design elements, and better logistical planning. The Cromwell's failures became lessons, painful, costly, but invaluable for the evolution of British armored forces. By the final day, the convoy approached its finishing point. Sherman's arrived with minimal fuss, their endurance proven over 2,000 miles. Cromwell's limped in, engines hissing and crews drained, bearing the physical evidence of the relentless journey. The contrast could not have been more dramatic. One set of machines had excelled through simplicity and reliability. The other had struggled under ambition and complexity. The implications were profound. For British engineers and commanders, the trial exposed the hidden vulnerabilities of even the most advanced tanks. For American designers, it validated a philosophy grounded in durability and practical efficiency. And for the men who had driven these machines across Britain, it was a lesson in patience, perseverance, and the unforgiving nature of mechanical warfare. As the convoy finally reached the outskirts of Newcastle, the full scope of the 2,000-mile trial became painfully evident. The Shermans had proven what engineers and commanders had long suspected. Simplicity and reliability were the foundations of sustained armored operations. The M4A2 and M4A4 models, despite their modest armor compared to some contemporary designs, had maintained their performance with minimal intervention, reinforcing the American philosophy that endurance could outweigh raw speed or firepower. The Cromwells, in contrast, had arrived battered but not defeated. Engines smoked, tracks were worn, and crews were exhausted. Yet every tank had made it to the finish line. This alone was an achievement, but the cumulative lessons could not be ignored. The trial had exposed vulnerabilities that, if repeated under combat conditions, could have been catastrophic. Overheating engines, delicate gearboxes, and high-maintenance components all demonstrated that high-speed cruiser tanks were ill-suited for extended, continuous operations without extensive logistical support. British commanders and engineers gathered to debrief, poring over every maintenance log, repair record, and crew report. The analysis was stark. While the Cromwell's agility and design innovation had been impressive, the practical realities of prolonged warfare demanded machines that could withstand fatigue, terrain, and time. Speed was valuable, but endurance and reliability were non-negotiable. This revelation would directly influence British tank development, shaping designs for the Centurion and later models that prioritize survivability and maintainability alongside performance. Meanwhile, American observers quietly confirmed their own expectations. The Sherman's success validated the wartime focus on simplicity and standardized components. Crews had spent less time on repairs and more time moving forward, reflecting an understanding that in war, movement was life. Every mile covered efficiently, every engine that ran without failure, was a testament to the practicality of the design. For the men who had endured the journey, the experience was a study in patience, resilience, and adaptation. Cromwell crews learned to anticipate mechanical issues, to improvise repairs on the fly, and to operate under conditions where failure could mean hours of delay or worse. Sherman crews, by contrast, grew to trust their machines implicitly, confident that their tanks could carry them across any terrain with minimal interference. The trial concluded not with fanfare, but with quiet recognition of what had been learned. The data collected would inform British armored doctrine for years, emphasizing the need for maintenance-friendly designs and operational flexibility. The psychological impact on crews was equally significant. British soldiers understood that even the most advanced technology could falter without practical resilience, while American crews took solace in the reliability that had carried them through grueling conditions. By the time the final reports were filed, one fact was indisputable. Endurance and reliability were decisive factors in modern armored warfare. The Cromwell had taught a painful, invaluable lesson, while the Sherman had quietly, efficiently proven its superiority in sustained operations. And as engineers packed away their tools and soldiers dismounted from their tanks, the truth was clear. History would remember not just victories and defeats, but the machines that made them possible, and the lessons that these trials had etched into the future of armored warfare. The 2,000-mile trial had ended, and with it came a sobering clarity. The Sherman had proved that endurance, simplicity, and reliability could triumph over ambition and speed. Its engines had hummed steadily across Britain, its tracks had held firm, and its crews had moved with confidence, knowing their machine would not fail them when it mattered most. The Cromwell, elegant and fast, had not failed entirely, but its limitations had been laid bare. Repeated breakdowns, overheating engines, and delicate components had revealed that brilliance in design could not replace practical resilience. British commanders, engineers, and crews returned home with lessons etched in sweat, grime, and the memory of long miles spent coaxing machines that sometimes refused to obey. The fallout from the trial extended far beyond the engineers' workshops. It reshaped British armored doctrine, guiding tank design toward machines that balanced performance with durability. Future generations of British tanks would carry these lessons into battle, embodying the hard-won understanding that reliability could determine victory as much as firepower or speed. For the men who had endured the journey, the trial left a mix of pride and humility. They had survived an unprecedented test of machinery, skill, and endurance, but they also knew that war favored those whose machines could outlast the rigors of the battlefield. In the end, the 2,000-mile trial was not just a measure of tanks. It was a testament to the unforgiving realities of modern warfare, and a reminder that history often judges the practical over the elegant. And so, as the sun set over the final checkpoint and the convoy came to rest, one truth remained. In the crucible of war, reliability was king, and lessons learned in Dorset that summer would echo across battlefields for years to come.